So, Nicolas, quite an election, wasn't it?
It was certainly an election. I guess it. First of all, can I also just start by acknowledging and recognizing the fact that the National Firearms Association. My thanks that the National Firearms Association shares my articles regularly, and I think a lot of your members are also my readers. So I just want to say publicly, because I don't get a lot of chances to thank you, but thank you.
Oh, you're most welcome, Nicolas. So that we appreciate the work you've been doing and your participation in our events, as well as your role in the National Firearms Association as a member.
Thank you.
Yeah, your blog is really great. It's always got good, timely information. It's current. It's helpful, and it's widely read, and it's really good. We're happy to share it.
Thank you. So that election.
Oh yeah.
I guess it wasn't a surprise. The polls that I was looking at suggested that we were leading towards a minority liberal government. And I guess the thing that most concerns me and us is what the Liberals promised.
Well, yeah. And I mean, I think the message that we can take away from this election is that, yes, they had some very mean-spirited attacks on firearms owners planned. However, they don't have a mandate to do really much of anything out of a very small geographic area of the country. They do have some supporters in other parties. However, they very clearly have engaged in a process which has been divisive and alienated a good number of people in this country. You've seen the rise of talk of things like separatism, particularly in Alberta and on the other parts of the prairies. There's no potential cabinet ministers that come to mind out west that are obvious choices for the Liberals to accept. And this really is a very difficult situation for Mr. Trudeau and his Liberals, should they be able to form a government, which still is not clear. I mean, they got the most seats. There are potential allies who may prop up their government for at least a while until they get their own fundraising situation sorted out so they can fight another election. But it's pretty clear they don't have a mandate to do any sweeping changes in just about anything, let alone going around and grabbing everybody's guns.
I saw your press release. You guys mentioned that right out of the gate. So thank you for saying that. I'm not used to watching a lot of elections, so I'm fairly new at this game. But I get the impression that our side, has to use every approach that we have at our disposal, whether it's challenging the mandate, if they do decide to push forward, challenging this administratively, procedurally, legally, charter, whatever techniques we have at our disposal to challenge the legitimacy. Well, let me flip that around, to assert the illegitimacy and the injustice of anything that they might try.
Well, yeah, and I mean, our toolbox on this is one we're going to have to be pretty careful about. We're going to have to pick our tools carefully. Certainly, the political aspect of it is important. People out there need to be contacting their members of parliament of whatever stripe and telling them that it's not okay to go around stealing Canadians' property and buying it back with their own tax dollars, which is one of the things Mr. Trudeau suggested. It's also not okay to engage in a divide and conquer type national strategy by which some municipalities might ban guns on a whim, and then another municipality might do it some other time, and then another election could occur and that could get reversed. The idea of municipalities having control over some aspect of federal firearms legislation is absolutely crazy, and it will lead to a patchwork of legislation across the country, which will make a mockery of our judicial system and put us in the same situation as many places in the United States, which also have patchworks of laws that are unclear, unknown by people, and easily violated by those who may be traveling or transferred for work or just innocently ending up in the circumstances where they happen to be legitimately owning firearms. It'll also affect sporting events that would normally take place, winter games, summer games, Commonwealth Games, Olympics. All these things are affected by this sorts of nonsense.
Yeah, you can imagine. I mean, you can imagine a situation where a shooting range is in a hostile municipality, so that shooting range gets closed, and maybe that was the nicest shooting range in the province for large-scale events, and that just kills the event. A little bit tongue-in-cheek, though, I wrote this on Twitter, and it got some interesting responses. If tongue-in-cheek, we allow municipalities to set their own firearm laws, well, who knows? Maybe some will be more permissive and fix some of the laws and allow.
Well, I think the thing that's going to be a problem in doing this is, first of all, municipalities are the creations of their provinces. They aren't
Right.
really holding any much of a legal status other than that. And what you'll find is that you'll get this drunken sailor type approach to law, in which a province will careen, or a municipality may careen for one way for a while, then careen another way for a while, depending on who gets elected.
Right.
And this is not healthy legislation. It builds uncertainty, and what it really does is dangerous. It builds a lack of respect for law and order, and we're going to see more of that.
And I think I'm really glad you said that. That I think is the bigger constraint issue here. A lot of people, right from the get-go, and I was happy to see this in the media, they clued in right away to the ineffectiveness of, I'm just seeing a message here, municipal gun control has already been tried in the USA and has failed to prevent criminals from getting and using illegal firearms. Yeah, exactly. So even the media traditionally, who are not sensitive to the issues of firearm users, clued in right away that any kind of municipal approach would be ineffective. I live in Toronto. The northern boundary of Toronto is Steeles Avenue. You cross Steeles Avenue and you're in another municipality. Go to the gun shop there. Like, there's no guns.
You live on one side of Steeles Avenue and you're not okay. You're on the other side. You're okay. That's crazy.
It's crazy, and I'm sure every city has that street that's the boundary. One side of the street is legal, the other side is illegal. It's just madness. The media clued into that right away, that the ineffectiveness. The much bigger issue,
and you're not going to see any of this have anything to do with stopping violent people from making bad choices and causing criminal activity and engaging in gang violence. It has nothing to do with you or me or any of the other millions of Canadians who legitimately own firearms.
I don't know about you, but when I was fighting C-71, I got a letter. I got CC'd on a lot of letters from sport shooters, hunters, and farmers. I didn't get CC'd on a lot of letters from gangbangers.
No, that, and our efforts on that, and your efforts as well, were fairly well known. We knew we weren't going to win it in the Commons. We made overtures to Commons MPs about it, but it wasn't going to go anywhere. And we concentrated our efforts on the Senate, where we had some pretty strong representation on Senate committees. And we were pretty successful there until it got back to the floor of the newly stocked Senate that tossed it back into the realm of government law. So that was not good. And I mean, in the election, NFA did a lot. We put, a pretty substantial budget into advertising, especially in the closing days of the campaign. We did targeted ridings. We made sure that we were going after swing ridings where we thought the Liberals deserved to be defeated, which was all of them really, but which we thought we could defeat them, like Ralph Goodale's riding. We concentrated on that. We looked at Bob Nault's riding and several others in the Lower Mainland in BC and in a few other places. And we really tried to do a maximum damage, as well as support conservatives that we thought would benefit from making sure that they got reelected. That's a nice comment from Charlie Zack.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. Good to see your message there.
Yeah, so it's great. So we put a lot into advertising at the end, and we think it was effective. I went out to Regina myself last spring to go meet with one of the big clubs out there and other individuals to talk about making sure we could take out Mr. Goodale and that we would support Mr. Scheer in that area, because that was an area where we had some very interesting ridings from our perspective, and we were successful. We did what we had hoped to achieve. Unfortunately, that big clump of red that exists down where you are or over where you are, Nicolas, is not very helpful. There are an awful lot of people in the Toronto area who bought the Liberal message, did not see the problems with all these scandals, didn't get it that what happened to Admiral Norman was not okay, what happened with Jody Wilson-Raybould and Philpott was really not okay, what happened with SNC Lavalin was not okay, and what happened with blackface and happened with this Mr. Dress Up stuff in India, none of that was okay. And I can't understand, and many Westerners, I think, can't understand it either, why there's so many people in Toronto think this guy is the answer to the world's problems, because he clearly isn't.
So there's an interesting thing. I looked at the numbers the day after, actually. So every riding in Toronto, all 25 ridings went Liberal.
Yep.
And I'm thinking, okay, geez, is it time to move out to Saskatchewan or to Alberta? Possibly. But then I looked at the detail of the numbers, and even though the Liberals won every riding because of our electoral system and the way people voted, actually the split, I can't remember if this is in Toronto only or across the country, but the split is actually, it's 60-40 in terms of, let's call them lefties to righties. In Toronto, it's roughly 60% lefties and roughly 40% righties. So it's not, even though the town got painted red, no pun intended, quite literally, it's the division is not as extreme. So that gives me hope, because when I saw the results, I really felt out of place in Toronto. I really felt like I didn't belong, and actually, it was reassuring to know that 40% of people did not vote for the party that's in power right now. But still, we do have a lot of work to do, and I think like what we're doing right now, I think is part of a broader goal. I would guess you see it the same way because you're doing it too. But our side, we're not very good at communicating and at boosting each other's message, and we tend to keep to ourselves. People leave and let live, and I really value that as an individual. But it's not good for recruiting, and it's not good for public relations when your adversaries have the front page.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And our adversaries have been getting pushed off the front page to some extent. I mean, I expect fully that we're going to see them trying to grab the front page again here in early December, as is the practice, when they do their annual dancing on the graves of victims, which is, I think, reprehensible and shocking. And I mean, there are certainly good reasons to abhor that practice, not the least of which that the proposals they're making have nothing whatsoever to do with stopping evil-intentioned people from doing evil things. But we're going to have to look at our particular program in terms of lobbying and legislative action in order to challenge whatever comes down the pipe. And I mean, we're already starting to try to meet with members of Parliament to make sure they hear our message. We are encouraging our members to make sure they meet with their members of Parliament to espouse that message, because the things that have come out of Trudeau's mouth and Jerry Butts's mind are not helpful. They're going to be more and more divisive to this country.
They are. And I think that you kind of alluded to that a few moments ago in the opening comments. That to me is, as a citizen, what is most disheartening. The gun stuff, honestly, I think in so many ways Canada has good gun laws. You've heard me say, though, that there's a few aberrations, the whole things that you guys have focused on and given me a hard time about.
There's a lot that needs to go, Nicolas.
There's a lot, absolutely.
We'll have a beer over that one day.
But there is a lot, we're allowed. There's a lot of countries where civilian firearm ownership is much more restrictive than here. So I kind of want to say, I love the fact that we're allowed to own guns. I love the fact that we have a relatively good diversity to what we can own. And some of the laws, and I've gone hard on this, are absolutely pervert some fundamental principles of justice, like innocent until proven guilty. Something I heard actually at your AGM, I guess it was this year or last year, the fact that the law criminalizes people who've done nothing immoral or injurious. So there are some very significant parts of the law that are absolutely cannot believe that this exists in a free country. And There's also a lot that's good. But the part that I find most disheartening is not about the effectiveness of the ineffectiveness of the policy. It's that this kind of shenanigans fosters distrust in our political institutions. It destabilizes democracy. It divides. It really puts people against the government. And I don't know if that's by design by the party in power, or if that's an accident, or they just didn't think this one through. But not one person has told me that they will happily comply with any confiscation order. Lots of people have told me that they won't, and they will happily get arrested. They will happily be charged in that kind of sense, or maybe not happily. But this is not healthy. This is not a healthy political discourse on a manufactured issue.
Yes, exactly. And we have much more pressing problems as a country that need to be dealt with. We have concerns about economics, energy, and we have a whole range of issues that this country really needs to address and have a serious talk about. And yet, what are we doing? We're trying to scapegoat firearms owners.
Yeah.
Yet again, has been the practice for 60 years in this country. Anytime something difficult comes up, what group can we bash? And we're seen as an easy minority. But the problem with this is we're not such a minority. And I think those numbers in Toronto do reflect the high rates of firearms ownership in Toronto. There are lots of people who own firearms in Toronto who got out and voted. And the problem of it is that they were just outnumbered by, well, others. And those others have got their own agendas. And everybody in politics thinks that they are right about whatever it is their ideology is. But it's pretty clear that when you have groups of people who are voting to suppress and go after an innocent minority, such as ourselves, that there is something seriously wrong with the way we're being governed.
I'm gonna be Mr. Glass half full tonight. I spend so much time being Mr. Glass half empty. Yeah, there it is. That's me. I spend so much time being Mr. Glass half empty on the website. The one thing that gives me hope, also, that I saw during the election campaign, I'm curious if you saw the same thing, was that some journalists who in the spring, when Minister Blair was talking about his gun ban consultation farce thing, they were cheerleaders for gun confiscation. During the election campaign, I saw some journalists who had done a complete 180. They were asking critical, skeptical questions. Their coverage had completely changed. And the coverage during the campaign, considering that gun ban, gun confiscation was one of the three pillars of the Liberal campaign, I was pleasantly astonished that it got hardly any coverage. Like, it was a total flop.
It was very much played down because I think what happened is that when they were doing their analytics and testing of the issue, they found that it wasn't playing anywhere but in Toronto. And that's largely due because of the pressure of John Tory in Toronto. Yeah. He's been very vocal about this, and that's been a thing there that's been playing. But it hasn't sold anywhere else. It didn't sell as an issue in the Maritimes. It didn't sell anywhere in Atlantic Canada. It did not sell in the Prairies. It did not sell in BC. It did not sell anywhere. And if we're going to go after them, I think the thing they need to understand is that what they have here is a need to deal with a problem and to go after the right symptoms, because gun ownership is not the symptom of the problem they're trying to fix.
Is there any hope? Is there any hope in hell of working with the Liberal Party? The Prime Minister and his party to resolve this problem, or is it purely, because I see it as purely one of electoral tactics? They're trying to get votes. They won the election. They're using this as a political weapon. They don't actually have a crime problem.
Well, Nicolas, I've reached out to every federal Liberal leader since John Turner.
30 years? 30.
With regards to firearms issues. And I have been rebuffed, ignored, and maltreated by every single one of them. I wrote letters to Ignatieff when he was leader, Dion, all of them. And they either ignored me completely, sent me a canned response, or just plain out refused to meet. They do not see firearms owners as part of their voting demographic, and therefore they feel that we're an easy target. And despite the fact, I remember Chrétien going out hunting. That was one of the things he did to try to do his image, but it meant nothing. It meant nothing. And I mean, Charles is posting about Blair's consultation process.
The circus.
Which we participated in. We had people speak at this. And there were a couple of other processes going on for consultation as well, which NFA participated in. But they did not get the answers they wanted to hear. The people they talked to were very negative about their proposals, but that didn't fit with the agenda, and it did not fit with the message that they were getting from downtown Toronto, that voting demographic, which they knew they needed to get in order to be successful in this election, wanted to hear. So you've got a very divided country. You've got a divided province in Ontario, frankly. You've got large movements and groundswells of firearms owners who are becoming more and more organized, more and more resistant to having their stuff taken. And I don't see a lot of compliance that's going to come out of anything. Even with people with restricted, they're not going to comply with this.
No.
There's all sorts of people out there who are perfectly good citizens who own firearms, who are not deserving of this treatment. They know that, and they're just not going to go along with it. I mean, I look at the Quebec Firearms Registry situation. The compliance there is well under 10%. I think it's under 6%.
The numbers that I laid, there's the less than half. I think it was the 2012 estimates are 1.6 million guns, and they've registered like 800,000. So maybe like a third or something. Yeah, they have a huge non-compliance, unenforceable. And the risk is also that people get angry. And I mean, I've heard stories, and I think I understand it. Okay, if you're going to turn in a lower receiver, you're going to take a grinder to it, make sure there's lots of sharp edges, or put it in a bucket of concrete and hand it over in a bucket of concrete. Certainly, and this is more serious, if people are considering turning in their guns, which some are, certainly don't turn in the whole thing. Why? Two reasons. One is, don't give the Liberals satisfaction. Two, you got crooked cops. I was visiting a gun club a few weeks ago, and I heard a story of a crooked cop who was selling a full firearm on the black market. Now, I don't know if it was part of a sting or if it was a real sale, but certainly we got to get the message out. Don't, if we get there, if in the worst case scenario that this thing actually goes through, don't turn in a full firearm.
Well, and nothing else, you can keep the parts when the next government comes in and reverses it. Or you know, this is the silly show this whole thing is about.
It's totally ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. It's unnecessary. I mean, we're seeing in New Zealand a similar pattern of resistance. Firearms owners there were a little slower to wake up. I mean, the government very, very quickly there, and people didn't have a chance to organize. But now they're organized, and they're not happy, and they're not cooperating, and they're forming new political movements to oust this Jacinda, who's MAGA there's a MAGA. Did you see? There's a MAGA caps. Make Ardern go away. MAGA. That's great.
And so right now it's October 31st in New Zealand, even though it's October 30th where we are. They're having a protest in Auckland. There's I tweeted about this last night in Auckland. Don't ban our guns demonstration. So they are taking to the streets now. They're rising up. The confiscation so far is a total failure. Like you said, a little bit late, but better late than never.
That's it. And I mean, I've heard people here talk about having rallies and having great movements, but I did all that in the 90s. I saw that happen for Bill C-68. We did it for Kim Campbell's nonsense. But what really seemed to help was the letter writing and the direct personal contact with MPs. A rally, you're there for a couple of hours. Everybody thinks they've done something. You've been ignored. You're on the media for a couple of minutes, and that's it. Poof. Nobody cares. So it's sustained pressure that makes the difference. Those letters, going to the meetings, going and talking to your MP. That's what really makes a difference. Sending our lobbyist into meet with these guys and explaining how we can help them get elected, how we can help them lose, how we're playing a role, and how we work with other groups in order to build our stock within political movements.
And I think also, just to also make it clear that if, again, worst case scenario planning, if this thing goes through, it will be costly in terms of finances, it will be costly in terms of resources, it will be costly politically, and they will wear this for generations, and we will make sure they wear this for generations.
Well, that's right. And again, these are the politics of division. These are Zelensky's rules. These are foolish choices that they're making that are alienating Canadians from each other. when we should be worrying about things like our economy. We should be worried about what it means to be a Canadian. We should be worried about where we are headed this century as a country, and we should be working towards those sorts of big questions rather than looking at who can we isolate, target, and smash for political points.
And spend a few $100 million on the purchase, but also hundreds and hundreds, and who knows how many hundreds of billions of dollars or millions on the administration, on building the new database, on destroying these things.
Exactly, and we've seen it before.
We've seen it before. I stagger at the costs. The absolute, just staggering at the costs of what this is. I want to ask you, in terms of timing, people give me some pushback when I think that this could go really fast. The cabinet will be announced on November 20th. Parliament, I guess, rises for Christmas in mid to late December. We have the 30th anniversary of the Polytechnique massacre on December 6th. And also the budget. The budget for this thing, apparently, from some reports, is from 2020, 2021.
If I were them, I would try to get a budget passed as fast as possible. I would try to do as much evil and nastiness as fast as possible. And I would hope that the opposition parties would not want to ruffle feathers or cause any trouble because they would be concerned about an election which more people might vote for the Liberals in order to prop them up, to give them stability so things can get done. Canadians hate going to more and more elections. They don't want a spaghetti parliament.
Well, it's an absolute waste of money, and it's, what are we going to, I mean, it's,
tremendously expensive.
Tremendously expensive. And I think the uncertainty too, and what our guys don't realize is that theoretically, not saying this will happen, but this could happen, Cabinet issues an order in council to prohibit those 250,000 guns, rifles. So the 2-year clock starts then. They take a couple years to figure out about the repurchase agreement, what they're calling buyback, right? It's not a buyback.
Good luck with that.
So they take a couple years to get that law passed. If the law doesn't pass, our guns are all prohibited still. So what happens when you have a couple 100,000 people all of a sudden in illegal possession of prohibited firearms?
Well, I think that whatever happens, nobody should be voting in favor of a buyback bill at all. That should not get supported in any sense.
And I'm going to say we shouldn't call it a buyback bill. It's a confiscation for payment or something.
It should not get supported. And it doesn't matter how many 30 pieces of silver they're prepared to chuck. That's really a sidebar to the issue, which is this is really about confiscation of people's property with their own money. And so I pay my taxes and I get a little bit of my tax money back because I get in effect, the government comes by and my taxes are paid with my firearms collection. I don't think so. That's not going to be a flyer. So what we're really needing to do is deal with those minority parties, look for their MPs who understand rural concerns, who understand the shooting fraternities' concerns, and who get the idea that there are people out there who are good people who own firearms who do not deserve to be treated as if they were felons.
I think one of the things I'm continuing to do is, one of my key constituencies is the media. As a journalist, as a former journalist employee, now an independent, I talk to a lot of journalists every week, and I'm finding that that's been very fruitful. They're getting it. One of my I consistently get the feedback that they like my facts and stats page. I have an article called "How to Buy a Handgun: Regulatory and Procedural Steps." That's one of my most hit pages. So it's easier for me to reach the media and journalists because there's fewer of them, right? There's not 2 million. There's a few in terms of the influential ones. I don't know. There's dozens or hundreds. It's not millions. But I think it's very interesting also to see if public opinion will shift as people get educated about this issue, especially the key influencers in Parliament, the MPs, the media, academia. I think there's I think there's opportunity there for us as well to be cheery, happy people, to explain that taking away property from safe and responsible people is not what good governments do to good citizens, and it
Certainly
raises a
not in
lot of ethical issues.
certainly not in Western democracies.
Yeah,
That certainly isn't good public policy, because if they're
no,
prepared to take your firearms, what else are they prepared to take? And
exactly.
I think that is a question that needs to be raised as well with some of these folks, because this is not about good public policy. This is about stealing people's property.
It
And
is.
if we as citizens let this happen, we are making our country a worse place.
Yeah. And I'm seeing Charles here. The black market loves state firearms buyback. Yeah, and that's true. Like
Oh yeah,
this will
this,
who isn't looking already how to get rid of some guns, make a quick buck. A Glock on the street is, I've heard stories in Toronto, a Glock on the street is thousands of dollars, 10 times the market price. So, it was lost, but, Mike from Canmore, all my guns, I think they
the
fell off a
canoe
boat.
sank.
All
Yeah,
the canoe
I
sank.
had all my guns in the canoe. It was so loaded up it sank.
Exactly. And I don't know where the current was strong and whatever. I mean, this is absolutely will create a gray market, a black market. There's no positive outcome to this. So I'm really curious about what I don't know the liberal strategists. I don't understand what they were thinking, what good could possibly come out of this.
Well, gun control was quoted to me by a conservative MP many years ago. He said, it's an issue on which you either win big or you lose big.
Let's make sure they lose big.
And I want to make sure that Canadian firearms owners make the Liberals lose big on this. Yeah. And I think there were a lot of mixed messages that were put out there to try to confuse people and mislead them. There were some unhelpful attempts to do divide and conquer exercises. And I think when people hear the words out of their prime minister's mouth, and he starts talking about gun bans and municipalities having control over who can own handguns in their jurisdictions and this sort of nonsense, we're going to see a terribly, terribly angry, woken giant in terms of the Canadian firearms community. And that giant is going to be out there looking for its justice. And that justice is going to come in another election. And I know people already are donating to political parties. We did well in supporting and advocating for support of the Conservative Party this time. We're going to make sure we talk to these guys and make sure they understand that they aren't off the hook either. There are things we expect from them when they get into power and start fixing this. Like this Firearms Act that we've been suffering under for 50 years does not work. There are a lot of problems with it. It needs a fundamental review. It needs fundamental reform, and we're going to hold them to that. And I mean, I see some people agitating for all kinds of wonderful things that would be nice to see, but we have to peel this onion back how it grew in order for that to be successful. And I mean, we have this licensing system that people go on about. And they talk about PALs and RPALs. Well, I don't know what an RPAL or a PAL is. I've got a whole bunch of prohibited stuff on my PAL. It's not my friend.
Yeah.
And my pal is not my friend. Maybe that's going to be my next meme that we put out.
I like it.
Yeah, my pal is not my friend. There, you heard it here first. I don't want to see that on some other firearms group's webpage tonight or something. Oh, look, we published it first.
Right. You better put out the meme tonight so you can say it's.
Yeah, we'll get our guys on that. But yeah, the PAL system is clearly a failure. All it ever was about was a taxation money grab. Yeah. It is not a badge of honor. It is not a means of preventing bad people from getting firearms. That can clearly be seen. Bad people get PALs. Bad people do bad things with firearms. I can only think of one mass shooter that didn't have a PAL, and that's the Mayor Thorpe killer. I won't use his name because that's not that kind of thing merely pushes the copycats. And if they would quit publicizing these people and giving them a platform when they do the nefarious acts, the research says that helps to play this stuff down. But the more you publicize these negative acts, the more you see copycats who want to try to beat the score. It's just a sick kind of competition is what it becomes then. So I mean, we've got to put an end to it. And I think the work you're doing with the Gun Blog is a really important aspect of how information gets out to people through journalists who come and look at your information. I think that our sharing of information and, cross-pollination of information, we get some information, we give it to you, you get some information, you give it to us, we share. And we make sure what we have is credible. We've got some great research out there that people need to see. Dr. Langman's stuff is fabulous. We've got Gary Mauser's stuff is great. We've got really solid work. Even the American research on all of this is helpful too. John Lott, who's come to our AGMs on many occasions, has produced some fantastic research, which is applicable to Canada's situation as well. And our own efforts in the international sphere, where we are actively engaged at the United Nations and with the other firearms organizations from around the world to share information, talk about strategies, and to warn each other about initiatives that are coming down the pipe, is working for us. We're much better informed and being able to inform others than we ever have been.
There's also an interesting global perspective, which is a little bit counterintuitive, but some countries are making firearm ownership and use for self-defense easier as their demographics change. So they're finding out that this highly restrictive approach failed, and it's costing people their lives. And so they're going the other way. Even France, even France. I mean, it's absolutely astonishing, again, in a good way. So there could be hope, maybe not for the best reasons.
Yes, well, that's right. And I mean, the whole issue of self-defense is a major one that needs to be part of the argument and part of the discussion. It isn't just about hunting and sports shooting. It's about a whole range.
And that's a huge deal for my readers. I just put this on my website a couple of days ago. I was surprised. I've always known that my self-defense stuff gets a lot of clicks. I didn't realize just how many. And the reports on the authorizations to carry, those are some of my top read articles. So the people who read TheGunBlog.ca care about self-defense. And so this idea that self-defense is not Canadian is absolute nonsense.
Well, it is nonsense. And I mean, it was normal for Canadians to carry firearms for protection, including handguns, well into the 70s and early 80s. But with the legislative changes in C-51, the introduction of the classification program, prohibited, restricted, non-restricted, antique, and so on, all of these things were designed to eliminate that. Safe storage laws are not about keeping firearms out of the hands of children. They're about preventing people from using firearms for self-defense. They're anti-self-defense.
Wow.
That's what they're about. So, when you hear people say, well, this is all okay, but we could keep these safe storage laws. Well, no. Safe storage is an educational issue, not a legislative.
And again, the storage laws are safe for the burglars, not for us.
That's right. And I mean, you're seeing more and more issues with crimes against property and crimes against person, particularly rural areas, where rural people are their own law enforcement. Police are hours away. There's no help. They have what they have, and you're seeing criminals take advantage of this. But well-publicized incidents of self-defense are the main reason that kind of criminal activity stops. It isn't penalties. It isn't mandatory minimum sentencing or anything like that. It is publicized people not taking the law into their own hands, but judiciously using their rights to self-defense, which they have and are guaranteed. Our laws allow for people to defend themselves. They allow for us to make arrests. The criminal code has this. Now, ideally, if you've got a policeman handy, then they can do that because they're the professionals, and that's what it should be. But when you don't have a policeman in your hip pocket all the time, and when you're living in rural British Columbia, rural Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, or Ontario, or anywhere else in this country, you often have to defend yourself from trouble, whether it be animal or two-legged.
And I want to include Toronto. Even in Toronto, where I live, the
Oh, yeah.
police are more than 4 seconds away. Right?
Well, our
Um,
contract lobbyist Fred Delory was actually a witness to one of the downtown shootings. He was out at a cafe and right out in the street, right beside him. He was one of the people who watched this happen right before him, and he was
holy
with
smokes!
someone who said, "Well, see, look, this is why people shouldn't have guns." He was one of the people he was with said to him, and he said, "Well, if I was armed, I probably could have done something about this."
Yeah,
And this is two different worlds, right?
yeah.
Our world is not the same as that world that says, well, if everything was rainbows and unicorns and skittles, that everything would be wonderful. It's not the real status. I see Charlie's post. A great time to buy an AR-15 and a handgun to
To
demonstrate your resolve.
demonstrate your resolve.
Yeah, I've done the same myself. This election has made me go out and do more shopping. I mean, it's
Good for you.
Absolutely.
Because the industry needs the reports I'm getting are stores and clubs are telling people that the market has dried up. Their people aren't renewing their memberships.
There's still stuff out there.
There's still, but no one's buying. It's the
Well, they should be. They definitely should be. And I mean, I think you should go in there and you could say, Bill Blair sent me, and Justin Trudeau sent me, and I think that people definitely need to make that kind of a statement.
Well, good. Is that a good place? Is that a good place to end?
Probably is. Nicolas, it's great to talk with you. I always enjoy our conversations, and it's good to see you. And again, we'll have to have another chat maybe at our next AGM. I think we're doing it in the Montreal area this year, and maybe that's not too far for you to take a spin down from Toronto and look at that old fur trading post there.
It'd be a pleasure. Thank you also for your support and for what you are doing.
Okay, appreciate it. All the best. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, thanks, guys. It's been great, very informational. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We had quite a bit of interaction, and it's been a good night. Watch for future posts of NFA Talk. Thanks again, guys.